ready to unlock a whole new world of communication.
Sounds exciting.
Because today we're diving into the basics of Spanish
Perfect for anyone just starting out.
as our jumping off point.
Excellent.
Maybe you're planning a trip,
Always a good reason.
want to connect with Spanish speakers,
I know so many wonderful people who speak Spanish.
or just love learning new languages.
It really opens up your world.
Whatever your reason,
It's going to be fun.
we've got you covered.
Let's do it.
Today we are diving into some basic Spanish greetings.
With Javi Correa from the Linguaffinity Institute. You know, you guys are already familiar with him, but we're going to refine your pronunciation. And you can find him all over the internet. He's got his YouTube channel, his Spotify podcast, Linguaffinity Institute Spanish. And, of course, he's on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram.
He's everywhere.
The whole shebang.
It's actually really smart to connect with your language teacher on multiple platforms. You get exposed to a lot of different types of content. You get a better feel for their teaching style, and it all helps you learn more effectively.
I think that's a great point. Think of it as leveling up your Spanish, just like you do in a video game. So you're already playing the game, but now it's time to like unlock those special skills and cheat codes.
I love that analogy.
So Javi starts off with, the classic hola for hello.
Right.
But one thing that he points out is that the H is silent.
Yeah.
It's more like hola.
Hola.
And this is something that is going to come up again and again, so it's worth noting right away.
Right off the bat.
He also covers ¿qué tal? And ¿cómo estás? Which both mean, how are you?
Yeah.
But here's where things get interesting. He introduces this concept of no es personal, which means it's not personal.
Right.
You see, in Spanish, these greetings, they aren't always meant to be taken literally.
Oh, interesting.
So unlike in English, where we might actually expect a detailed response to, how are you?
Right.
In Spanish, a simple bien, which is good, is often all that you need.
Oh, wow.
You don't have to launch into a whole story about your day.
So it's not like a real question necessarily.
Yeah, it's more of a social nicety.
Gotcha.
Like when someone says, how's it going?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily stop and tell them everything that's going on in your life.
Yeah, totally.
So this is a really important cultural difference to be aware of.
Especially for Spanish learners.
Especially for Spanish learners, yeah. If you are just starting your Spanish journey with Javi Correa and the Linguaffinity Institute, don't feel pressured to overshare when someone greets you with ¿qué tal?
That's good advice.
Just a simple bien y tú,
Yeah.
which is good and you, is totally acceptable.
Easy enough.
Now, what about time-based greetings? Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Pretty straightforward, right?
Well, not so fast. Buenas tardes is where things get interesting. It actually covers a really long stretch, from 1 p.m. all the way to 8 p.m.
Wow, that's a long afternoon.
Right. And then you've got buenas noches, which can be both a greeting and a farewell after 9 p.m. It's like a 2-for-1 deal.
I love a good deal. Now, what about saying goodbye? Javi covers some of the most common farewells, like adios, goodbye, and a bunch of phrases that basically mean see you later, like hasta luego, hasta pronto, and hasta la vista.
Classic.
And this is where Javi really brings in the cultural context to life.
Javi even shares this funny fact about the Spanish dub of Terminator 2, where they changed hasta la vista, baby, to sayonara, baby, because hasta la vista is so common that it wouldn't have had the same impact.
Wow, it's so interesting how a simple farewell can mean so many different things.
Yeah.
And yes, that silent H is back.
There it is again.
He also points out that the literal meaning of adios and hasta luego isn't always strictly followed.
Okay.
You might say adios to someone and actually see them again later that day.
Huh.
Or you could say hasta luego and never see them again.
Interesting.
It's a great example, though, of how even simple phrases can have different cultural implications.
Right, right.
Okay, so we've covered greetings and farewells, but what about addressing our friends in a more informal way?
I'm curious.
Yeah, well, Javi gives us a whole list of words that mean friend in Spanish.
There's got to be a lot of those, right?
There are a lot of them.
Okay.
Some of the most common ones include tío and tía,
Okay.
which are kind of like dude or girl in English.
Right.
He also mentions colega, chaval, or chavala, and even campeón or campeona, which literally means champion.
That's cool.
You got to love the enthusiasm there.
I know.
And for those of you who want to get really specific with your slang, he even includes some regional variations.
Wow.
Like tronco or tronca, which is common in Madrid,
Okay.
or guaje, which is used in Asturias.
It's fascinating to see how these terms reflect the diversity of Spanish culture, right?
Absolutely. And it just goes to show that language is so much more than just words and grammar.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with people on a cultural level and understanding the nuances of their communication style.
It really is.
Now, before we move on to the fascinating world of time in Spanish,
Yeah,
Javi wants to make sure that you are pronouncing things correctly.
of course.
He provides a really clear guide to Spanish vowel pronunciation, which is essential for anyone who wants to speak Spanish with confidence.
Right.
And this is something that Javi really emphasizes in his Linguaffinity Institute courses.
He's the expert.
He knows how important pronunciation is, and he gives his students the tools they need to master it.
Yeah.
He points out that each vowel in Spanish has a distinct sound.
Okay.
Unlike in English, where vowels can have multiple pronunciations depending on the word.
Right.
For example, the letter A is always pronounced A, like in father.
Okay.
E is pronounced A, like in bad. I is E, like in see. O is O, like in go. And U is U, like in moon.
And don't forget about the silent H.
Right. And he also gives a specific tip about the number 11 in Spanish.
Okay.
It's pronounced once, not like the English word once.
Subtle difference.
Yeah, it's a small detail, but it can make a big difference in your pronunciation. Yeah, for sure. Javi has given us so much to explore, from that silent H to those tricky vowel pairs, and even how to say hello and goodbye. We'll be back in a bit to keep going with our deep dive into Spanish pronunciation, so stick around.
Now, before we go too far into time, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about training your mouth to make those Spanish vowel sounds.
It really is like learning to play an instrument, right? You wouldn't expect to play a song on the piano without practicing first. It's the same with Spanish pronunciation.
Exactly. And Javi gives us some great tips. He says it's important to listen to native speakers and try to copy how they sound.
So being like an echo.
Yeah, basically. He also says to record yourself speaking Spanish and then compare it to a native speaker. It might be hard to hear at first, but it helps you see where you need to change your tongue or mouth shape.
It's like having your own pronunciation coach in your pocket.
Speaking of coaches, Javi reminds us that there's a bunch of great stuff online, like YouTube videos and pronunciation guides, that can help us improve our accents.
Yeah, he really believes in surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible. Yeah. Watching Spanish movies, listening to Spanish music, talking to native speakers. The more you hear real pronunciation, the better you'll get.
It's like training your ear to hear those differences in intonation, rhythm and stress that make Spanish sound so unique. Speaking of unique, Javi also talks about regional accents in the Spanish-speaking world.
Wow, that's interesting. It shows us that language is always changing. It adapts to different cultures and places, can feel overwhelming thinking about all these variations. But it also makes Spanish even richer and more diverse.
Absolutely. It's like exploring a huge landscape. Each region has its own special linguistic flavor. As you get better at Spanish, you'll start to notice and even be able to copy these differences.
It's like adding new colors to your language palette.
Yeah.
You can express yourself more clearly and authentically. But before we get too sidetracked by regional accents, let's come back to the main point of this deep dive. Those 5 essential Spanish vowel sounds.
Right. Javi reminds us that while it's cool to know the little differences, mastering those core sounds is the most important thing for speaking Spanish well. And he gives us some great tips to do that.
Yeah. What are some of his suggestions?
Well, he encourages us to practice the vowel sounds regularly, paying attention to where our tongue is and the shape of our mouth. He even says to use a mirror to see how our mouth moves.
I can see how that would be helpful.
It might feel a little silly at first, but it's a great way to become more aware of how you're making the sounds. He also says to listen carefully and try to copy the sounds exactly.
Okay, and what about for words?
He says to break down words into syllables and focus on saying each vowel clearly.
Like a workout for your mouth.
Exactly. And as you get comfortable with the individual sounds, you can start practicing words and then phrases, slowly making them more difficult and faster.
So start slow and build up.
Yeah. And Javi says the key is to practice regularly. Even a few minutes each day can make a big difference over time.
That's encouraging to hear.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's part of learning. Actually, Javi says to use your mistakes to learn and get better.
That's a good way to look at it.
He says even native Spanish speakers make mistakes. So don't be too hard on yourself. The most important thing is to keep practicing and try to sound more like a native speaker.
That makes sense. Are you ready to dive into the wonderful world of time in Spanish?
Let's do it.
It's a bit different from what you might be used to.
I'm ready.
But once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite logical.
I'm sure Javi will make it easy for us. First things first, in Spain, they don't use AM and PM like we do
Right.
to tell the time.
Instead, they use phrases like de la mañana, de la tarde, and de la noche.
Exactly.
So, for example, las 2 de la mañana means 2 a.m., while las 5 de la tarde means 5 p.m., and las 9 de la noche means 9 p.m.
Makes sense.
It's a different way of thinking about it.
It is.
But it makes sense when you consider how the day unfolds.
Yeah. How would you break that down then?
Well, Javi breaks it down like this.
Okay.
La mañana, or morning,
Okay.
runs from 1 a.m. to 11 a.m.
Okay.
Then we have la tarde,
Okay.
which covers both afternoon and evening,
Oh, wow.
from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Okay.
And finally, there's la noche,
Okay.
or night, from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m.
Okay. Got it.
And then there's this other period
Oh, there's more.
called la madrugada,
La madrugada. Okay.
which is the period from midnight to 6 a.m.
Okay.
It's kind of like our wee hours of the morning.
I see. So there's like 4 different periods.
Yeah, you could think of it like that.
Instead of just 2.
And he also points out that el mediodía means midday, and la medianoche means midnight.
Okay.
Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute,
I am actually.
la tarde goes until 8 p.m.
That seems kind of late, right?
That seems late.
Yeah, for the afternoon to extend that long.
But it actually makes a lot of sense when you consider the longer daylight hours in Spain.
Oh, that's true.
In some parts of the year, it's sunny until 9 p.m. or even later.
Wow.
So la tarde really reflects that extended period of daylight and activity.
So it's not just about the time on the clock.
Right, it's not just about the time on the clock, it's about how people experience the day.
Interesting.
And Javi gives a great example to illustrate this difference.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He compares una de la madrugada versus una de la mañana.
Okay.
So una de la madrugada is a very specific way to say 1 a.m.
Okay.
It's firmly within that madrugada period.
Gotcha.
Whereas una de la mañana can be a little more ambiguous.
Okay.
It can be part of madrugada or the very beginning of mañana,
I see.
depending on the context.
So you really have to pay attention.
Right. You really have to pay attention to the surrounding information to understand exactly what time someone is talking about.
That makes sense.
And that's a key takeaway from all of this language learning with Javi Correa and the Linguaffinity Institute.
Absolutely.
Context matters.
It really does.
Words don't always have a one-to-one translation,
Right.
and their meaning can shift depending on the situation.
Oh, true.
Okay, so we've got a handle on the general time periods in Spain,
I think so.
but how do you actually tell the time in Spanish?
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Well, Javi gives us a really clear overview of how to do just that.
Okay.
He starts with o'clock, which is en punto.
En punto? Okay.
So, for example, las 7 en punto de la mañana means 7 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Then for quarter past, we use y cuarto, like las 3:15 de la tarde. For quarter past 3 in the afternoon,
Easy.
half past is y media. And finally, for quarter 2, we have menos cuarto.
Menos cuarto. Okay. That's really clear.
Javi really makes it easy to understand with those clear examples.
He does.
And he emphasizes that this is just a basic introduction to time in Spanish.
Right.
He'll be diving deeper into the topic in a future episode of his podcast series,
I can't wait.
which is great news for those of you who want to really master this aspect of the language.
Absolutely.
He also reminds us that in his next episode,
Oh, yeah.
he'll be covering how to introduce yourself to others in Spanish.
That's exciting.
That sounds like a great next step in our Spanish language journey with Javi Correa.
I think so, too.
Don't you think? I feel like we've learned so much
Yeah.
about how to greet people,
Mm-hmm.
say goodbye, address your friends
Until time.
in Spanish.
Like a Spaniard.
But I have a feeling this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah. There's so much more to learn about Spanish language and culture.
Well, Javi hints at that at the end of this episode.
Right.
He mentions that in the next installment of his Deep Dive into Spanish series, he's going to be talking about introductions,
Oh, cool.
which is perfect now that we know how to greet people and say goodbye.
Right.
We're ready to start introducing ourselves and getting to know others in Spanish.
I'm excited for that one.
And knowing Javi, he's going to break down the process in a clear, engaging way, making it easy for learners to grasp the essentials.
Yeah, he's really good at that.
And he really wants people to, engage with the material. He actually encourages his viewers to ask questions and share their thoughts in the comments section.
He wants to hear from them.
Yeah, it's that kind of interaction that can really enhance the learning process and make it more dynamic and fun.
Yeah, I love that about his videos.
And he also suggests checking out his other podcast series,
Oh, right.
Pure Spanish Grammar Explained.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
For those of you who are ready to dive even deeper into the technical aspects of Spanish grammar.
So he's got something for every level.
There's something for everyone.
From beginner to advanced.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see someone so passionate about sharing their love of language and culture with the world.
And that passion's contagious.
It really is. It makes you want to grab your nearest Spanish textbook and start practicing everything that you've learned.
I know, right?
So what are your biggest takeaways from today's deep dive into Spanish with Javi Correa from the Linguaffinity Institute?
I think for me it was realizing that just like learning the words and the grammar is important.
Right.
Understanding the cultural context is just as important.
Yeah, and we've really gotten a taste of that today.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. You know, thinking about how Spaniards think about time, the way they greet each other, the way they say goodbye.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And it makes you appreciate the richness and complexity of language.
It does.
So we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep practicing your Spanish.
Yeah, keep diving in.
And most of all, have fun with it.
Hasta pronto.
Hasta la vista.